The cardboard walls did nothing to stop the bitter Denver wind. Rebecca Anderson pressed her 3-week-old son Jake closer to her chest, feeling his tiny body shiver against the thin blanket. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and she could see her breath in the dim light from the street lamp. Jake's cries had grown weaker over the past hour. That scared her more than anything. Strong, loud cries meant he was fighting. These soft whimpers meant he was getting too cold to fight anymore. "Please, baby, stay with me," she whispered, rubbing his back through the warm blanket. "Just make it through tonight." 3 weeks ago, she had been a different person. She had worked as a social worker, helping families in crisis. She had her own apartment, a reliable car, and a nursery ready for Jake's arrival. Then the medical bills from his difficult birth wiped out her savings. Her apartment was gone 2 weeks later when she couldn't make rent. Her car was repossessed 3 days after that. Now she sat behind a dumpster next to the towering glass building where people in warm offices worked late into the night. She had chosen this spot because the building blocked some of the wind, and there was an outdoor electrical outlet where she could charge her phone during the day. The irony wasn't lost on her. A month ago, she would have been the one trying to help someone in her situation. She knew all the shelters, all the programs, all the resources. But knowing about help and actually getting it were two different things. Every shelter was full. Every program had a waiting list. Every agency told her to call back tomorrow. Jake's breathing seemed more shallow now. Rebecca's hands were so cold she could barely feel his tiny fingers when she checked them. They were turning blue. "I'm so sorry, baby," she cried softly. "Mommy tried everything. I tried so hard." The glass doors of the office building reflected the street lights like ice. Inside, she could see the warm glow of offices where people worked in heated comfort. She had considered going in to ask for help, but the security guard had already told her twice to move along during the day. Jake stopped crying altogether. The silence was worse than the whimpering. Rebecca stood up, holding her son close. Maybe if she walked, the movement would warm him up. Maybe there was somewhere else to go, somewhere she hadn't thought of yet. She couldn't let him slip away. Not like this. Not when he had barely started his life. The wind picked up, cutting through her thin coat like knives. Jake's lips were definitely blue now. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was so light she had to put her ear to his chest to hear it. "Help," she called out to the empty street. "Please, somebody help us." But Denver's downtown was empty at this hour. The only sound was the wind and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. Rebecca looked up at the office building one more time. A few windows were still lit on the upper floors. Someone was up there, warm and safe, while her baby was dying in her arms. She had to try one more time. Rebecca walked toward the front entrance of the building, Jake bundled against her chest. The security guard would probably call the police this time, but she didn't care anymore. Her son needed warmth, and she would do anything to get it for him. The glass doors were thick and heavy. Through them, she could see a marble lobby with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. It looked like heaven compared to the freezing sidewalk. Jake made a small sound, barely a breath. Rebecca looked down at his pale face and felt her heart breaking. She raised her hand to knock on the glass doors, knowing it was probably useless, but having no other choice. At that moment, she heard voices coming from inside the building. Male voices, one deeper and one much higher. They were getting closer to the entrance. Rebecca stepped back from the doors, suddenly embarrassed. What if they were important business people? What if they called security? What if they thought she was dangerous? But then she looked down at Jake again. His tiny chest was barely moving now. Fear shot through her like lightning. "Please don't let him die," she whispered. "Please." The voices were closer now. Rebecca could see shadows moving toward the entrance. In a few seconds, those doors would open, and whoever was inside would see her standing there with a dying baby. She closed her eyes and made a decision. Whatever happened next, she would find the courage to ask for help. Jake's life depended on it. The lock clicked, and the doors began to swing open. Have you ever wondered what you would do if you saw someone in desperate need right outside your door? Would you have the courage to help, or would you walk away? Let me know in the comments what you think should happen next. Thomas Mitchell pushed open the glass doors of his office building, his 6-year-old daughter Sophie's hand tucked safely in his. He had stayed late again, working on quarterly reports. And Sophie had been patient as always, coloring at the small desk he had set up for her in his office. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Sophie said, skipping beside him. "Can we get the mac and cheese from that place with the funny cow on the sign?" "Of course, sweetheart," Thomas replied, fishing his car keys from his pocket. "We can get extra cheese just how you like it." The cold hit them like a wall when they stepped outside. Thomas immediately regretted not bringing Sophie's heavier coat. He was about to suggest they go back inside to wait for the car to warm up when Sophie suddenly stopped walking. "Daddy," she whispered, pointing toward the side of the building. "There's a lady over there." Thomas looked where Sophie was pointing. At first, he didn't see anything except shadows and the dumpster. Then he saw movement, and a figure stepped into the light from the street lamp. It was a young woman, probably in her 20s, holding what looked like a bundle of blankets. She was thin, with long brown hair that hung loose around her face. Her coat was too small and had holes in the elbows. She was shivering so hard that Thomas could see it from 20 feet away. "She looks cold, Daddy," Sophie said softly. "Really, really cold." Thomas felt his heart sink. He had seen homeless people before, of course, but always from his car or at a distance. He usually wrote checks to charities and assumed that was enough. Seeing someone this close, someone so obviously in need, made him feel uncomfortable and sad at the same time. The woman seemed to notice them watching her. She took a step back, as if she was going to disappear into the shadows again. "Wait," Sophie called out before Thomas could stop her. "Wait, please." The woman froze. Thomas could see her face now in the streetlight. She was pretty, but her eyes looked scared and exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept in days. "Sophie, come back here," Thomas said quietly, but his daughter was already walking toward the woman. "Hi," Sophie said in her friendliest voice. "I'm Sophie. What's your name?" The woman looked from Sophie to Thomas, clearly uncertain. "I'm Rebecca," she said finally. Her voice was soft and shaky from the cold. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked. "You look really cold." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "We're okay," she said, but her voice broke on the words. That's when Thomas noticed the bundle she was carrying. It wasn't blankets. It was a baby. "Oh my goodness," Thomas said, walking closer. "Is that your baby?" Rebecca nodded, holding the bundle tighter. "His name is Jake. He's 3 weeks old." Sophie gasped. "Can I see him?" Rebecca hesitated, then carefully pulled back a corner of the blanket. Thomas felt his stomach drop. The baby was pale, almost blue around the lips. His breathing was shallow, and he wasn't making any sounds. "Daddy," Sophie whispered urgently, tugging on Thomas's coat. "Daddy, her baby is freezing." Thomas looked at Jake's tiny face and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about charity or writing checks anymore. This was about a mother and her newborn son who might not survive the night without help. "Rebecca," he said gently, "how long have you been out here?" 3 days, she whispered. "All the shelters are full. I've been trying to keep him warm, but—" She trailed off, looking down at her son with an expression of complete desperation. Thomas made a decision. "You're coming with us," he said. "Right now." Rebecca's eyes widened. "I can't. I don't want to be any trouble." "You're not trouble," Sophie said firmly. "You're a mom with a baby, and babies need to be warm. My daddy can help. He helps everybody." Thomas smiled at his daughter's confidence in him. "Sophie's right. We have a warm car, warm house, and plenty of food. You and Jake need help, and we can provide it." "I don't know," Rebecca said, but Thomas could see she was wavering. Jake made a tiny sound, and she looked down at him with fresh tears. "Please," Thomas said. "Let us help you. For Jake's sake." Rebecca looked at Jake, then at Sophie's earnest face, then at Thomas. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Thomas felt relief wash over him. He hadn't realized how worried he had been about her saying no. "My car is right here," he said, pointing to his black SUV parked at the curb. "Sophie, can you help me get the doors open?" Sophie ran ahead to the car, proud to have an important job. Thomas walked beside Rebecca, who was still shivering violently. "Everything's going to be okay," he told her. "We're going to get Jake warm and make sure both of you are safe." Rebecca nodded, but tears were streaming down her face now. "I was so scared," she whispered. I thought he might not make it through the night." "He's going to be fine," Thomas said with more confidence than he felt. "We're going to take care of both of you." As they reached the car, Thomas realized that his and Sophie's lives were about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. But looking at Jake's pale face and Rebecca's grateful eyes, he knew they were doing the right thing. Sophie was already climbing into her booster seat. "Hurry, Daddy," she said. "We need to get the baby warm." Thomas helped Rebecca into the passenger seat and cranked up the heat. Within minutes, Jake's color started to improve slightly, and Rebecca stopped shivering quite so hard. "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked softly. "Home," Thomas said simply. "We're going home." Thomas's house was a two-story colonial in Cherry Creek, one of Denver's nicest neighborhoods. As he pulled into the driveway, he could see Rebecca taking in the manicured lawn, the flower boxes under the windows, and the warm light coming from inside. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I don't want to impose on your family." "You're not imposing," Thomas assured her. "It's just Sophie and me. My wife passed away 2 years ago." "I'm so sorry," Rebecca said, and Thomas could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. Sophie was already unbuckled and reaching for the door handle. "Come on," she said excitedly. "I want to show you my room, and Daddy has the softest blankets ever." Thomas helped Rebecca out of the car, noting that she was still shivering despite the car's heat. Jake seemed more alert now, his eyes open and looking around with the curious gaze of a healthy newborn. "He looks better already," Thomas observed. "The warmth helped," Rebecca said, smiling down at her son. It was the first genuine smile Thomas had seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. "Thank you for this. Really." Inside the house, Thomas immediately turned up the thermostat and led Rebecca to the living room. The space was comfortable and lived in, with family photos on the mantel and Sophie's toys scattered on the carpet. "Sit here," Sophie commanded, patting the cushions on the big sectional sofa. "It's the warmest spot in the whole house." Rebecca settled onto the couch, and Thomas noticed she was careful to keep Jake positioned where he could continue to warm up. "Can I get you something to drink?" he offered. "Coffee, tea, hot chocolate." "Hot chocolate sounds wonderful," Rebecca said. "If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all. Sophie, do you want to help me in the kitchen? Can I stay here with Rebecca and Jake?" Sophie asked. "I promise I'll be good." Thomas looked to Rebecca, who nodded. "I'd like the company," she said. In the kitchen, Thomas put the kettle on and tried to process what had just happened. 3 hours ago, he had been reviewing financial reports. Now he had a homeless mother and her baby in his living room. It should have felt strange or overwhelming, but instead, it felt right. He could hear Sophie chattering away in the living room, asking Rebecca questions about Jake and offering to share her favorite stuffed animals. Thomas smiled as he made the hot chocolate. Sophie had always been naturally caring, but tonight she was in full nurturing mode. When he returned to the living room with 3 steaming mugs, he found Sophie showing Rebecca a picture book about puppies while Jake slept peacefully in his mother's arms. "He's so cute," Sophie was saying. "His hands are tiny like doll hands. Would you like to hold him?" Rebecca offered. Sophie's eyes went wide. "Really? I can hold a real baby." "If your dad says it's okay," Rebecca said, looking to Thomas. "Of course," Thomas said, setting down the mugs. "Just remember what I taught you about being gentle." Rebecca carefully transferred Jake to Sophie's arms, showing her how to support his head and neck. Sophie sat very still, staring down at the baby with complete fascination. "Hi, Jake," she whispered. "I'm Sophie. I'm going to be your friend." Thomas felt his chest tighten with emotion. Sophie had been asking for a sibling for months, but he had never seriously considered dating again, let alone remarrying. Seeing her with Jake, though, he realized how much she missed having someone small to care for. Rebecca sipped her hot chocolate gratefully. "This is perfect," she said. "I can't remember the last time I had something warm to drink." "When did you last eat?" Thomas asked gently. Rebecca's cheeks flushed. Yesterday morning, there was a church that gave out breakfast sandwiches. Thomas stood up immediately. I'm making you dinner. What do you like? Really, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Thomas said firmly. You're nursing a baby, and you need proper nutrition. What sounds good? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears again. Anything. Truly, anything would be wonderful. I vote for grilled cheese and tomato soup, Sophie announced from her position as baby holder. It's the best sick food, and I think you might be a little sick from being so cold. Thomas laughed. Grilled cheese and tomato soup it is. That's Sophie's favorite comfort food. While Thomas cooked, he could hear Rebecca telling Sophie about Jake's birth and his personality quirks. She had been a social worker before Jake was born, she explained, helping families who were struggling with various challenges. Like you're struggling now? Sophie asked with the innocent directness of a 6-year-old. Yes, like I'm struggling now, Rebecca agreed. Sometimes helpers need help too. When Thomas brought the food to the living room, he found Rebecca feeding Jake while Sophie watched with rapt attention. The scene was so domestic, so natural, that for a moment Thomas felt like they were a family that had been together for years rather than strangers who had met an hour ago. This smells incredible, Rebecca said, accepting the plate of grilled cheese triangles and bowl of soup. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank us, Sophie said matter-of-factly. Friends help friends. That's what my daddy taught me. After dinner, Thomas showed Rebecca to the guest room upstairs. He had already put fresh sheets on the bed and set up the portable crib they had used when Sophie was a baby. I pulled this down from the attic, he explained, gesturing to the crib. I hope it's okay for Jake. Rebecca ran her hand over the crib rail, tears streaming down her face. It's perfect, she whispered. He's going to sleep in a real crib tonight. Rebecca, Thomas said gently, I want you to know that you're welcome to stay as long as you need. We're not going to put you back on the street tomorrow. She looked at him with such gratitude that Thomas felt his own eyes water. Why are you doing this? She asked. You don't even know me. Thomas thought about it for a moment. Because Sophie was right, he said finally. Your baby was freezing, and we could help. It's that simple. It's not simple for me, Rebecca said softly. This is everything. As Thomas tucked Sophie into bed later that night, she was full of questions about their house guests. Daddy, can Rebecca and Jake stay forever? She asked. We'll see, sweetheart. They need to get back on their feet, and that might take some time. I hope it takes a really long time, Sophie said. I like having them here. The house feels less quiet. Thomas kissed his daughter's forehead and realized she was right. The house did feel different with Rebecca and Jake there. It felt more alive, more like a home instead of just a place where he and Sophie lived. Downstairs, he could hear Rebecca singing a lullaby to Jake. The sound drifted through the house like a blessing, filling spaces that had been empty for too long. Thomas woke up the next morning to the sound of Sophie's laughter coming from downstairs. He checked his phone and was surprised to see it was already 8 o'clock. He had slept more soundly than he had in months. In the kitchen, he found Sophie sitting at the breakfast table with Rebecca, who was feeding Jake a bottle. Both of them were still in their clothes from yesterday, but they looked rested and comfortable. Morning, Daddy, Sophie called out cheerfully. Rebecca was telling me about her job helping families. She knows lots of kids who needed help just like Jake needed help. Good morning, Thomas said, heading for the coffee maker. How did everyone sleep? Like a dream, Rebecca said, smiling. I can't tell you what it meant to sleep in a real bed with Jake in a real crib. We both slept for 6 hours straight. Thomas poured coffee for himself and Rebecca, then started making pancakes. It felt natural to cook for 3 people instead of just 2. Sophie kept up a steady stream of chatter, asking Rebecca about her work and telling her about school. I should probably try to find a job today, Rebecca said eventually, her voice becoming more serious. And look into childcare options. Let's take care of Jake's health first, Thomas suggested. When did he last see a doctor? Rebecca's face fell slightly. At the hospital when he was born 3 weeks ago. I haven't been able to afford a checkup since then. I'd like to take you both to see Dr. Hayes, Thomas said. She's Sophie's pediatrician, and she's wonderful. I'll call and see if she can work you in today. Thomas, I can't pay for a doctor visit right now, Rebecca said quietly. Let me worry about that, Thomas replied. Jake needs to be checked out after spending 3 days in the cold. It's important. Rebecca looked like she was going to argue, but Sophie spoke up first. Dr. Hayes is really nice, she said. She has stickers and lollipops, and she always tells me how brave I am. See? Thomas said. Sophie approves. That's the highest recommendation you can get. After breakfast, Thomas called Dr. Hayes' office and explained the situation. The receptionist put him through to Dr. Hayes directly, and within 10 minutes, she had agreed to see Jake that afternoon. She's squeezing us in during her lunch break, Thomas reported. She said any baby who spent time in that kind of cold needs to be evaluated right away. While they waited for the appointment, Thomas suggested they go shopping for some necessities. Rebecca tried to protest, but Sophie was already making a list of things Jake would need. Diapers, bottles, baby clothes, a car seat, Sophie counted on her fingers. And maybe some new clothes for Rebecca too, because those ones have holes. Rebecca laughed despite herself. You're very observant, Sophie. Daddy says I notice everything, Sophie said proudly. It's my superpower. At the store, Thomas was amazed by how much babies needed. Rebecca knew exactly what to look for, but she kept checking price tags and trying to choose the cheapest options. Get what Jake needs, Thomas told her. Don't worry about the cost. This is too much, Rebecca said, looking at the cart full of baby supplies. I feel like I'm taking advantage of your kindness. You're not, Thomas said firmly. You're accepting help when you need it. There's a big difference. Sophie had wandered over to the clothing section and was holding up a soft blue outfit. This would look perfect on Jake, she announced. And this one, and this one. Before they knew it, Sophie had selected an entire wardrobe for Jake, plus a few items for Rebecca. Thomas was amused to see that his daughter had excellent taste and a good eye for what would fit. At Dr. Hayes' office, Jake received a thorough examination. The pediatrician was a kind woman in her 50s who spoke gently to both Rebecca and Jake throughout the checkup. He's a strong little boy, Dr. Hayes announced after listening to his heart and lungs. No signs of illness from the cold exposure. He's actually quite healthy for a baby who's been through so much stress. Rebecca cried with relief. I was so worried that I had hurt him by not being able to keep him warm enough. You did exactly what any good mother would do, Dr. Hayes assured her. You kept him close, kept him as warm as possible, and sought help when you needed it. He's going to be just fine. Dr. Hayes also gave Rebecca information about local resources for new mothers, including WIC benefits, child care assistance, and job training programs. I used to refer families to these programs all the time, Rebecca said, studying the paperwork. It's strange being on the other side of it. There's no shame in needing help, Dr. Hayes said kindly. The system exists precisely for situations like yours. On the drive home, Sophie fell asleep in her car seat while Jake slept peacefully in his new car seat. Rebecca stared out the window at the Denver skyline. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream, she said softly. It's not a dream, Thomas assured her. And tomorrow we're going to start figuring out how to get you back on your feet permanently. Why are you doing this? Rebecca asked. Really? You could have just called social services or given me money for a hotel room. Why are you getting so involved? Thomas thought about it as he navigated the afternoon traffic. Sophie and I have been pretty isolated since my wife died, he said finally. We go to work and school, come home, and spend evenings just the two of us. It's comfortable, but it's also lonely. Having you and Jake with us feels right, like we're part of something bigger than just our own little world. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I've been so focused on just surviving that I forgot what it felt like to be part of a family, she said. Even if it's temporary, this feels like the first time I've been able to breathe in months. It doesn't have to be temporary, Thomas said. Not until you're ready and able to be independent again. That evening, they established a comfortable routine. Sophie helped Rebecca give Jake his bath while Thomas cooked dinner. Rebecca proved to be an excellent storyteller, entertaining Sophie with tales from her social work days about families who had overcome incredible challenges. So the little girl and her grandma ended up opening their own bakery. Sophie asked, wide-eyed, They sure did, Rebecca confirmed. And last I heard, they were the most popular bakery in their whole neighborhood. See, Daddy, Sophie said. Stories like that always have happy endings. Thomas smiled, realizing that their own story was just beginning to unfold. What would you do if you had the chance to completely change someone's life? Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest transformations. What do you think will happen next in Rebecca and Jake's story? Word spread quickly through Thomas's company about Rebecca and Jake. It started when Maria Santos, Thomas's assistant, noticed him researching child care centers and local job training programs during his lunch break. "Everything okay, Mr. Mitchell?" she asked, setting his afternoon coffee on his desk. Thomas told her about Rebecca and Jake, and Maria's eyes filled with tears. "That poor woman," she said. "My sister went through something similar after her divorce. It's so hard to get back on your feet when you have a baby." By the end of the week, Maria had organized what she called Operation Fresh Start. Without asking Thomas for permission or money, she had coordinated with other employees to create a comprehensive support network for Rebecca. "We've got it all figured out," Maria announced, sitting in Thomas's office with a notebook full of plans. "Jennifer from accounting used to run a daycare. She's willing to watch Jake for free while Rebecca looks for work or goes to job interviews. Pete from maintenance has a cousin who runs a temp agency. And Sarah from marketing has been collecting baby clothes and supplies from everyone in her neighborhood." Thomas was amazed. "You organized all of this in 3 days." "People want to help," Maria said simply. "Everyone has a story about someone they know who needed a hand up. This just gave them a chance to actually do something about it." When Thomas got home that evening, he found Rebecca and Sophie in the kitchen making dinner together. Jake was sleeping peacefully in a baby swing that Sophie had insisted they needed. "How was work?" Rebecca asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Actually, I have some interesting news," Thomas said, and told them about Maria's initiative. Rebecca sat down hard in one of the kitchen chairs. "They don't even know me," she said. "Why would they do all this?" "Because people are good," Sophie said matter-of-factly, stirring the pasta sauce. "And because they want to help Jake have a nice life." The next day, Thomas brought Rebecca and Jake to his office to meet some of the people who had been working behind the scenes to help them. The reception was overwhelming. Jennifer Brooks from accounting was a grandmother of 5 who immediately cooed over Jake and offered detailed advice about baby care. "He's beautiful," she told Rebecca. "And don't you worry about childcare. I've been missing having little ones around since my youngest grandchild started school." Pete Rodriguez from maintenance shook Rebecca's hand warmly. "My cousin Marco runs Rodriguez Staffing Services," he said, handing her a business card. "I already called him and told him about you. He says he can probably find you something within a week, especially with your social work background." Sarah Chen from marketing arrived with 3 bags full of baby clothes, toys, and supplies. "These are from my mom's group," she explained. "We all have kids who outgrew this stuff, and we're so happy it can go to someone who needs it." Rebecca was crying by the time they finished meeting everyone. "I don't know what to say," she told Thomas. "This is incredible." Dr. Hayes had also been busy. When she called that afternoon, she had news about a local nonprofit that provided services for families in transition. "It's called New Beginnings," she explained. "They offer temporary housing assistance, job training, and childcare support." I spoke to the director, Pastor Jonathan Miller, and is very interested in meeting with Rebecca. Pastor Miller turned out to be an energetic man in his 40s who ran New Beginnings out of his church in downtown Denver. His office walls were covered with photos of families who had been helped by the program, and his enthusiasm was infectious. "Rebecca, your background in social work makes you a perfect candidate for our program," he said. "We're actually looking for someone to help us expand our family services. It would be part-time to start, but it could grow into something more permanent." "You mean I could work helping other families while getting help myself?" Rebecca asked. "That's exactly what I mean," Pastor Miller confirmed. "Some of our most effective counselors are people who have been through tough times themselves. They understand what families are going through in a way that someone who has only studied it academically can't." Rebecca accepted the position immediately. The job came with access to temporary housing assistance, but when Thomas heard about it, he made a suggestion. "Why don't you stay with us a little longer?" he said. "At least until you're established in the job and have had time to save up for your own place. There's no rush." "Are you sure?" Rebecca asked. "It could be a few months." "I'm sure," Thomas said. "Sophie loves having you both here, and honestly, so do I. The house feels like a home again." Sophie, who had been listening to the conversation while coloring at the kitchen table, looked up with a big smile. "Plus, Jake is just starting to smile at me. I can't miss that." 2 weeks into Rebecca's new job, she came home with news that made everyone excited. "I helped a family today that reminded me so much of myself," she told Thomas and Sophie over dinner. "A single mom with twin babies who lost her apartment. Pastor Miller let me work directly with her to find resources, and by the end of the day, we had her set up with temporary housing, childcare, and a job interview." "That's wonderful," Thomas said. "How did it feel?" "Like I was meant to do this work," Rebecca said. "Like everything I went through was preparing me to help other people in the same situation." Sophie clapped her hands. "It's like a circle," she said. "You got helped, and now you're helping other people, and they'll probably help people too." "That's exactly right," Rebecca said, hugging Sophie. "It's a circle of kindness." That weekend, they celebrated Rebecca's first paycheck by having a cookout in Thomas's backyard. Maria and her family came, along with Jennifer, Pete, and several other co-workers who had become invested in Rebecca and Jake's story. "This is what community looks like," Pastor Miller said, watching Jake being passed from person to person while Sophie played with the other children. "People coming together to lift each other up." Thomas stood beside Rebecca, both of them watching the scene unfold in the backyard. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," she replied. "A month ago, I thought my life was over. Now I feel like it's just beginning." As the sun set over Denver, casting long shadows across the yard, Thomas realized that helping Rebecca and Jake had done more than just change their lives. It had created a community of people who cared about each other, who were committed to helping others in need, and who had discovered that giving was just as rewarding as receiving. 3 months after that cold night behind the office building, Rebecca had settled into a comfortable routine at Thomas's house. She worked 4 days a week at New Beginnings, earning enough to contribute to household expenses and slowly build up savings. Jake was thriving, rolling over consistently and starting to sit up with support. The most unexpected development was how naturally she, Thomas, and Sophie had become a family unit. They shared cooking duties, took turns with bedtime stories, and had developed inside jokes that made them all laugh until their stomachs hurt. "Rebecca, can you help me with my math homework?" Sophie asked one evening, climbing onto the couch where Rebecca was folding laundry while Jake played on his blanket on the floor. "Of course," Rebecca said, setting aside the tiny clothes. "What are you working on?" "Word problems," Sophie said, making a face. "I hate word problems. They are tricky." Rebecca read over Sophie's homework and smiled. "These aren't so bad. Let's try this one together. Sarah has 24 stickers. She gives 8 stickers to her friend and 6 stickers to her brother. How many stickers does Sarah have left?" "I don't know where to start," Sophie complained. "What if we act it out?" Rebecca suggested. "Pretend these crackers are stickers." She counted out 24 goldfish crackers on the coffee table. Sophie's face lit up. "Oh, I see. She starts with 24, then gives some away." They worked through the problem together, using crackers to represent the stickers. When Sophie got the right answer, she cheered and hugged Rebecca tightly. "You're a good teacher," she said. "Will you help me with homework tomorrow too?" "Of course I will," Rebecca replied, smoothing Sophie's hair. From the kitchen, Thomas watched the scene with a warm feeling in his chest. Rebecca had a natural way with children, and Sophie had blossomed under her attention. His daughter seemed more confident and happy than she had been since her mother died. Later that evening, after Sophie was in bed and Jake was sleeping peacefully in his crib, Thomas and Rebecca sat in the living room with cups of tea. "I need to start looking for my own place," Rebecca said quietly. "I've been here 4 months now, and I have enough saved for a deposit and first month's rent." Thomas felt a pang of disappointment, though he tried not to show it. "If that's what you want," he said. "But you know you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like." That's just it, Rebecca said, setting down her teacup. I like it here. I like it too much. Sophie feels like my own daughter, and this house feels like my home. But I can't let myself get too comfortable in a situation that was always meant to be temporary. Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing her words. What if it doesn't have to be temporary? Rebecca looked at him with surprise. What do you mean? I mean, what if this could be permanent? What if we could be a real family? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Thomas, you've already done so much for me. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, Thomas interrupted gently. I'm offering. Sophie and I were just existing before you came into our lives. Now we're really living. We laugh more. We talk more. We become part of a community. You've given us as much as we've given you. But what about dating? Rebecca asked. What about finding someone you actually chose to be with, instead of someone who just needed help? Thomas reached over and took her hand. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. The night we met you, I hadn't been on a date in 2 years. I hadn't even thought about dating. I was focused entirely on work and Sophie, and I thought that was enough. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But spending these months with you has made me realize that I was just going through the motions. You've brought joy back into this house. Sophie adores you. Jake feels like the son I never thought I'd have. And you. He smiled. You've become my best friend. Rebecca wiped tears from her cheeks. I love you too, she said softly. All of you. But I'm scared. What if this is just gratitude? What if when the novelty wears off, you realize you don't really want the responsibility of someone else's child? Jake is not someone else's child, Thomas said firmly. Not to me, and not to Sophie. His family. And as for gratitude versus love. He squeezed her hand. I think I know the difference. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both processing the conversation. Finally, Rebecca spoke. I'd like to try, she said. But I want to do it right. I want to pay my share of expenses. I want to contribute equally to this household. I don't want to be the person you rescued. I want to be your partner. Deal, Thomas said immediately. We'll figure out all the practical details. The important thing is that we're all in this together. The next morning at breakfast, they decided to tell Sophie about their decision. She listened seriously as they explained that Rebecca and Jake would be staying permanently, and that they were going to become a real family. So Rebecca would be like my mom. Sophie asked. If you want her to be, Thomas said. What do you think about that? Sophie looked at Rebecca thoughtfully. Can I still call you Rebecca? I like your name. Rebecca laughed. You can call me whatever feels right to you. Okay, Sophie said. And Jake is already like my little brother, so that part's easy. She paused, then added, will we have a wedding? Thomas and Rebecca looked at each other and started laughing. One thing at a time, Thomas said. Let's just focus on being a family for now. But weddings have cake, Sophie pointed out logically. We can have cake anytime we want, Rebecca said. We don't need a wedding for that. Sophie considered this and nodded approvingly. That's true. Can we have cake tonight to celebrate being a family? Absolutely, Thomas said. Chocolate or vanilla? Both, Sophie said. Families need lots of cake. That afternoon, Thomas called Maria to share the news. Within an hour, his phone was ringing with congratulations from co-workers, and by evening, Pastor Miller had stopped by with flowers and an offer to help plan a housewarming party. This calls for a celebration, Pastor Miller said, admiring Jake's newest trick of clapping his hands. The whole community has been invested in your story. They'll want to celebrate this next chapter with you. As Rebecca tucked Sophie into bed that night, Sophie had one more question. Rebecca, are you happy you came to live with us? Sophie, coming to live with you and your dad has been the best thing that ever happened to me and Jake, Rebecca said honestly. Good, Sophie said with satisfaction. Because I love having a big family. It's way better than just me and Daddy. Later, as Rebecca and Thomas sat in the living room planning their new life together, Thomas realized that the scared, desperate woman he had met behind his office building had become the strong, confident woman he wanted to spend his life with. No more looking back, Rebecca said, as if reading his thoughts. From now on, we only look forward. Forward to what? Thomas asked. Rebecca smiled and gestured around the room, where Jake's toys were scattered on the carpet and Sophie's art projects were stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. To this, she said. To family. 6 months later, New Beginnings had grown into one of Denver's most successful family assistance programs, largely due to Rebecca's work. She had developed an innovative peer support program that paired families who had successfully transitioned out of crisis situations with families who were just beginning their journey. The idea is simple, Rebecca explained to a group of potential donors at a breakfast meeting. People who have been through tough times themselves can offer hope and practical advice in ways that professional counselors alone cannot. Thomas sat in the back of the room, watching Rebecca speak with confidence and passion to the assembled business leaders. She had come so far from the frightened woman he had met in the cold. Our success rate has improved by 40% since implementing the peer support model, Rebecca continued. Families are not only getting back on their feet faster, they are staying stable longer because they have a support network of people who truly understand their challenges. After the presentation, several business owners approached Rebecca with offers of partnership and support. Thomas was proud but not surprised. Rebecca had a gift for connecting with people and inspiring them to action. How did it go? Sophie asked when they got home that evening. She was now 7 years old and took a keen interest in Rebecca's work. Really well, Rebecca said, settling onto the couch with Jake, who at 9 months old was crawling everywhere and getting into everything. We might be able to expand the program to help twice as many families next year. That's a lot of families, Sophie said thoughtfully. Were you nervous talking to all those grown-ups? A little, Rebecca admitted. But then I remembered why I was doing it, and the nervousness went away. Why were you doing it? Sophie asked. For families like the Martinez family, who just got their own apartment last week, and the Johnson family, who both found jobs and were able to get their car back from repossession, and for families like us, who sometimes need help and sometimes can give help. Sophie nodded sagely. It's still the kindness circle. The next week brought exciting news. Pastor Miller called to tell Rebecca that a major foundation had awarded New Beginnings a significant grant, specifically to expand the peer support program she had developed. This is incredible, Rebecca, Pastor Miller said, barely containing his excitement. This grant will allow us to hire 3 more staff members and help 500 additional families next year. 500 families, Rebecca repeated, stunned. That's amazing. It's all because of your vision, Pastor Miller said. You've revolutionized how we think about family services. That evening, Thomas suggested they celebrate by going out to dinner as a family. They chose the same restaurant where they had planned to go that first night, before they met Rebecca and Jake. It's funny, Thomas said as they waited for their food. 6 months ago, we were going to come here for just mac and cheese. Now we're celebrating your professional success. And we're a bigger family, Sophie added, trying to keep Jake entertained with crayons and coloring pages. Jake, can you say Sophie? Sophie. Jake babbled happily and grabbed at the crayons, making everyone laugh. I've been thinking, Rebecca said, about how to make the peer support program even better. What if we created a mentorship component where successful families could commit to helping new families for 6 months or a year? Thomas smiled. Always thinking about how to help more people. I can't help it, Rebecca said. Every time I see a family succeed, I think about how we can help the next one succeed too. The following month, Rebecca was invited to speak at a national conference on innovative approaches to family services. The conference was in Chicago, and Thomas encouraged her to go, even though it meant being away from home for 3 days. This is a huge opportunity, he told her. Your work is making a difference not just here in Denver, but it could help families all over the country. But I've never been away from Jake for more than a few hours, Rebecca worried. He'll be fine, Thomas assured her. Sophie and I are pretty good at taking care of babies by now. The conference was a tremendous success. Rebecca's presentation on peer support models was so well received that she was invited to consult with programs in 5 other cities. When she called home each evening, she could barely contain her excitement. They want to replicate our program in Phoenix, Portland, Atlanta, Minneapolis, and Houston, she told Thomas. Can you believe it? I can absolutely believe it, Thomas said. You've created something special. When Rebecca returned from Chicago, she found the house decorated with welcome home banners that Sophie had made, and Jake immediately crawled to her with delighted squeals. We missed you, Sophie announced, hugging Rebecca tightly. Jake kept looking for you, and Daddy burned the pancakes twice. I missed you all too, Rebecca said, realizing that she had truly found her home. Over dinner, Rebecca shared more details about the conference and the opportunities that had emerged. The consulting work would mean some travel, she explained, but it would also mean helping hundreds more families nationwide. Then you have to do it, Sophie said immediately. Right, Daddy. Absolutely, Thomas agreed. We'll figure out the logistics. This is too important to pass up. That night, after Sophie was asleep and Jake was settled in his crib, Rebecca and Thomas talked about how much their lives had changed. A year ago, I was struggling just to keep Jake warm and fed, Rebecca said. Now I'm being asked to share our story with programs across the country. It doesn't seem real. It's real because you made it real, Thomas replied. You took the help that was offered, you worked hard to rebuild your life, and now you're using your experience to help others. That's exactly what the Kindness Circle is supposed to look like. I keep thinking about something Sophie said once, Rebecca mused. About how helping one person creates a circle that keeps growing. I wonder how many families will ultimately be able to help because of that night you and Sophie found us. Thomas pulled her closer. I think the number might be bigger than we can imagine. As they sat together in the quiet house, listening to the sounds of their children sleeping peacefully upstairs, they both understood that their story was no longer just about one family being rescued. It had become about an entire community committed to making sure no family had to face crisis alone. The Kindness Circle was indeed growing, and there was no telling how far it might eventually reach. A year and a half after that fateful night, Rebecca received a phone call that would change everything again. She was at her office at New Beginnings, reviewing applications for the expanded peer support program, when her phone rang. Rebecca Anderson, the voice on the other end asked. Yes, this is Rebecca. My name is Patricia Wells, and I'm a reporter with the Denver Post. I've been following the work you've been doing with New Beginnings, and I'd like to write a feature story about your program and how it got started. Rebecca's heart started beating faster. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with a newspaper story, she said. My work is important, but I'm not looking for personal publicity. I understand, Patricia said gently. But your story isn't just about you. It's about how communities can come together to solve problems. I think it could inspire other cities to develop similar programs. After discussing it with Thomas and Pastor Miller, Rebecca agreed to the interview. She was nervous about sharing such personal details with a stranger, but she understood the potential impact. The interview took place at New Beginnings, with Rebecca sitting in her office, surrounded by thank you cards from families she had helped. Patricia Wells turned out to be a thoughtful journalist who asked insightful questions about both the personal and professional aspects of Rebecca's journey. What was it like being on the other side of the help? Patricia asked. Going from being the social worker to being the person who needed social services. Humbling, Rebecca answered honestly. I thought I understood what families were going through, but I really didn't. The bureaucracy, the waiting lists, the constant worry about whether you'll find help in time, experiencing it myself made me a much better advocate. Tell me about the night you met Thomas Mitchell, Patricia requested. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she recounted that desperate evening behind the office building. I was at the end of my rope, she said. I thought Jake might not survive the night. When Thomas and Sophie found us, they literally saved our lives. And now you're engaged to be married. Rebecca smiled and looked down at the simple engagement ring Thomas had given her 3 months earlier. Yes. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure it's all real. The story ran on the front page of the Denver Post Sunday edition, with a headline From Crisis to Hope, How One Family's Rescue Became a Community Movement. The article detailed not just Rebecca's personal story, but the broader impact of the peer support program and the network of people who had rallied to help. Thomas read the article over coffee that morning while Sophie worked on her homework at the kitchen table and Jake played with blocks on the floor. Listen to this, he said, reading aloud. What started as a simple act of kindness on a cold Denver night has transformed into a nationally recognized model for community-based family support. Rebecca Anderson's peer support program has helped over 300 families transition from crisis to stability, and similar programs are now being implemented in 8 other cities. "That's us," Sophie said proudly. "We in the newspaper." The response to the article was immediate and overwhelming. Rebecca's phone started ringing early Monday morning with calls from reporters, program directors, and family service organizations from across the country. "This is incredible," Rebecca told Thomas that evening. "I've gotten calls from programs in 15 states asking for help implementing peer support models." "You're going to be busy," Thomas observed, bouncing Jake on his knee while Rebecca sorted through the messages she had received. "We're going to be busy," Rebecca corrected. "I can't do this alone, and I don't want to. This affects our whole family." The most unexpected call came on Wednesday afternoon. Rebecca was in a meeting when Maria knocked on her office door. "Rebecca, there's a woman online too who says she's from the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C., Maria said. "She wants to talk to you about your program." The woman on the phone introduced herself as Dr. Elizabeth Warner, Director of Family Services Innovation at HHS. "Ms. Anderson, I read the article about your work in the Denver Post, and I'm calling because we're developing new federal guidelines for family support programs. Would you be interested in serving on our advisory committee?" Rebecca almost dropped the phone. "The Federal Advisory Committee." "That's right. We're looking for practitioners who have developed innovative, successful models that could be scaled nationally. Your peer support program fits exactly what we're looking for." After hanging up, Rebecca sat in her office for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. When she finally called Thomas to tell him the news, she could barely get the words out. "They want me to help shape federal policy on family services," she said. "Me, the woman who was homeless 18 months ago." "They want you because you were homeless 18 months ago," Thomas replied. "You understand these issues in ways that most policymakers never could." That evening, the family had a serious conversation about what this opportunity would mean. The advisory committee would meet in Washington, D.C. 4 times a year, and there would be additional travel for consultations and conferences. "I want you to do it," Sophie said firmly when they explained the situation to her. "You can help families everywhere, not just in Denver." "But it means I'll have to travel more," Rebecca said. "Are you okay with that?" "We'll miss you," Sophie said, "but we want you to help as many families as possible. Plus, Jake and I will get to take care of Daddy while you're gone." Thomas laughed. "I think I'm the one who takes care of you too." "We take care of each other," Sophie corrected. "That's what families do." 2 months later, Rebecca found herself sitting in a conference room in Washington, D.C., surrounded by some of the nation's top experts on family services policy. She had been nervous about fitting in, but she quickly realized that her practical experience was exactly what the group needed. "The problem with most family support programs," she said during her first committee meeting, "is that they are designed by people who have never actually needed family support services. They focus on what sounds good in theory rather than what actually works for families in crisis." Dr. Warner nodded approvingly. "That's exactly why we need your perspective. Can you give us some specific examples?" Rebecca spent the next hour detailing the barriers she had encountered when seeking help for herself and Jake, and explaining how the peer support model addressed those barriers by connecting families with people who had successfully navigated the same challenges. By the end of the meeting, the committee had voted to recommend that peer support components be included in all federally funded family service programs. "You've just influenced policy that could affect millions of families," Dr. Warner told Rebecca afterward. "I hope you realize the significance of what you've accomplished here." Flying home to Denver that evening, Rebecca looked out the airplane window at the lights of the cities below and thought about all the families those lights represented. Families who might be struggling tonight the way she had struggled that cold evening behind Thomas's office building. But now, because of the work she was doing, many of those families would have a better chance of finding not just help, but hope. When she walked into Thomas's house, their house, later that night, she found Sophie asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest and Jake sleeping peacefully in his portable crib nearby. Thomas was dozing in his chair, obviously having fallen asleep while waiting for her to get home. Rebecca stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. This was her family. This was her home. And this was the foundation that made all of her other work possible. Thomas stirred and opened his eyes. How did it go? Better than I ever imagined, Rebecca said, settling beside him on the couch. But I'm glad to be home. Me too, Thomas said, putting his arm around her. We all are. 2 years later, on a crisp October evening in Denver, the ballroom of the Brown Palace Hotel was filled with hundreds of people celebrating the 3rd annual New Beginnings Gala. Rebecca stood at the podium, wearing a navy blue dress that Sophie had helped her choose, looking out at the crowd of donors, volunteers, families, and community leaders who had become part of their extended family. 3 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. I was a homeless mother with a newborn baby, sitting behind an office building in the cold, wondering if we would survive the night. The room was completely silent, everyone focused on her words. Tonight, I stand before you as the Director of National Family Services Innovation, married to my best friend, mother to 2 beautiful children, and part of a community that has proven that kindness can indeed change the world. The applause was warm and sustained. Thomas, sitting at the front table with Sophie and 3-year-old Jake, smiled proudly. Sophie, now 9 years old and Jake's fiercest protector, clapped enthusiastically while Jake tried to imitate her. But this celebration isn't really about me, Rebecca continued. It's about every person in this room who chose kindness over indifference, hope over cynicism, and love over fear. It's about Maria Santos, who organized the first collection of supplies for Jake and me. It's about Dr. Patricia Hayes, who examined Jake when I couldn't afford a doctor. It's about Pastor Jonathan Miller, who gave me not just a job, but a purpose. She paused as each person she mentioned stood and waved to acknowledge the applause. It's about Jennifer Brooks, who provided childcare so I could work. It's about Pete Rodriguez, who helped me find my first job. It's about all the volunteers, donors, and families who have proven that when we come together as a community, there's no problem we cannot solve. Rebecca's voice grew stronger as she continued. In the past 3 years, our peer support program has helped over 1,500 families transition from crisis to stability. Our model is now being used in 43 cities across the United States, and we've trained over 500 peer support specialists. The crowd erupted in applause again. Rebecca waited for it to quiet down before continuing. But the numbers only tell part of the story. The real story is about families like the Hernandez family, who went from living in their car to opening their own restaurant. It's about the Wilson family, who used the job training program to start their own home renovation business. It's about the Taylor family, who now volunteer every weekend to help other families find stable housing. She gestured towards several tables where program graduates were sitting with their families. These families didn't just receive help. They became helpers. They didn't just survive their crises. They used their experiences to make their community stronger. Rebecca looked directly at Thomas and Sophie, her voice becoming more personal. I've learned that rescue is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing choice we make to show up for each other, day after day, in ways both big and small. Thomas and Sophie Mitchell didn't just save Jake and me from freezing that night. They chose to keep saving us, and we chose to keep saving them right back. She smiled as Jake stood up in his chair and waved at her, making the audience chuckle. Sophie taught me that kindness is like a circle that keeps growing. Every family we help becomes capable of helping other families. Every person who receives hope becomes capable of giving hope to someone else. Rebecca's final words were directed to the entire room. So tonight, as we celebrate how far we've come, I want to challenge each of you to look for your own opportunities to start a kindness circle. Because somewhere in this city, there's a family that needs what you have to offer. There's a mother who needs encouragement, a father who needs a job, a child who needs a mentor, a family who needs hope. She concluded with a story that brought many people to tears. Last month, I met a young mother named Lisa who was living in her car with her 2 children. When I told her about the peer support program and offered to help her find housing and employment, she looked at me with the same desperate hope I must have had in my eyes that night Thomas and Sophie found me. Today, Lisa has her own apartment and a job at a local childcare center. More importantly, she's already asking how she can volunteer to help other families who are where she was just 6 weeks ago. That's the kindness circle in action. That's the miracle that happens when communities decide that no family has to face crisis alone. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. When Rebecca finally returned to her table, Sophie hugged her tightly. "That was the best speech ever," Sophie declared. "You made everyone want to help families." "That was the point," Rebecca said, laughing and wiping away tears. Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "But more than that, I'm proud of us. Look what we've built together." Later that evening, after the gala had ended and Jake was asleep in his crib, Thomas, Rebecca, and Sophie sat in their living room, which was now filled with photos documenting their journey as a family and the growth of the program. "Rebecca," Sophie said, curled up between her parents on the couch, "do you ever think about that night when we found you and Jake?" "I think about it often," Rebecca replied. "Why do you ask?" "Because I think that was the most important night of my whole life," Sophie said seriously. "Not just because we helped you and Jake, but because that's when I learned that families can grow and love can multiply and kindness really can change everything." Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes again. "You know what, Sophie? I think you're absolutely right." Thomas looked around their living room, taking in the scattered toys, the family photos, the certificates and awards Rebecca had received, and the comfortable chaos of a busy, happy home. 3 years ago, he had been a single father going through the motions of life, focused entirely on work and basic survival. Tonight, he was part of a thriving family and a growing community movement that was changing lives across the country. "So what's next?" he asked Rebecca. "More families," Rebecca said without hesitation. "More cities. More peer support specialists. More kindness circles. And more adventures for our family," Sophie added. "Because we're just getting started." As they sat together that night, warm and safe and surrounded by love, all three of them understood that their story was really just the beginning. The kindness circle that had started with a simple act of compassion on a cold Denver night had grown beyond anything they could have imagined. And it was still growing. 5 years after that transformative night, Thomas stood in the kitchen of their expanded home, preparing breakfast for what had become a bustling household. Rebecca was feeding 4-year-old Jake, while simultaneously reviewing notes for a conference call with family service directors from 12 different states. Sophie, now 10, was helping her adopted brother Jake sound out words from his favorite book. The kitchen table, once set for just two, now accommodated not only their family of 4, but frequently hosted guests from the constant stream of visitors who came to Denver to learn about the peer support model that had revolutionized family services across the nation. "Daddy, can we tell Jake the story again?" Sophie asked, looking up from the picture book. "About the night we became a real family." Thomas smiled, setting plates of pancakes on the table. This had become Jake's favorite bedtime story, though he had heard it dozens of times. "Which part of the story do you want to hear, buddy?" Jake clapped his hands excitedly. "The part where Mama was cold and you and Sophie saved us." Rebecca looked up from her notes, her expression soft with love and remembrance. "Do you want to tell it, or should I?" "We'll tell it together," Thomas said, settling into his chair. "Just like we do everything else." As they ate breakfast, they recounted the familiar story. How Sophie had spotted Rebecca and baby Jake behind the office building. How they had brought them home for what was supposed to be one night. How that single act of kindness had grown into a marriage, a family, and a nationwide movement that had helped thousands of families. "And now Mama helps other mamas who are scared and cold," Jake added, having memorized his part of the story. "That's right," Rebecca said, ruffling his hair. "And someday, when you're bigger, maybe you'll help families too." "I want to help families like Sophie helps," Jake declared. "Sophie is the best helper ever." Sophie beamed with pride. At 10, she had become actively involved in New Beginnings, helping with children's programs and serving as a junior mentor to kids whose families were transitioning out of crisis. The phone rang, interrupting their breakfast routine. Rebecca glanced at the caller ID and smiled. "It's Patricia Wells from the Denver Post. She's doing a follow-up story for the 5-year anniversary of the original article." "Tell her we're still the same family, just bigger and happier," Sophie suggested. That afternoon, Patricia Wells sat in their living room, which was now decorated with family photos that told the story of their journey. Photos of Rebecca's college graduation, where she had completed her master's degree in social work. Photos of their wedding, where Jake had served as ring bearer and Sophie as maid of honor. Photos of Thomas receiving a community service award for his ongoing support of family assistance programs. When I wrote the first article about your family, Patricia said, I had no idea it would have such far-reaching impact. The peer support model is now being implemented internationally. How does it feel to know that your story has influenced family services policy in 6 different countries? Rebecca and Thomas exchanged a glance. They had heard similar questions dozens of times over the years, but the answer remained consistent. It feels like proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose kindness, Rebecca said. We didn't set out to change the world. We just tried to help each other, day by day. The real heroes are the families who do the hard work of rebuilding their lives, Thomas added, and the communities that support them. We just provided a model for how people can come together effectively. Patricia turned to Sophie, who was sitting nearby with Jake, helping him build a tower with blocks. Sophie, you were 6 when you first saw Rebecca and Jake. Do you remember what you were thinking that night? Sophie looked up thoughtfully. I remember thinking that the baby needed to be warm, and we had a warm house. It seemed simple then. It still seems simple now. Out of the mouths of babes, Patricia said, laughing. Sometimes the most profound truths are the simplest ones. Later that evening, after Patricia had left and Jake was asleep, Rebecca found a quiet moment to reflect on how dramatically their lives had changed. She was now Dr. Rebecca Mitchell, having completed her PhD in social work while working full-time and raising 2 children. Her dissertation on peer support models had been published and was being used in social work programs across the country. The peer support model she had developed had evolved into a comprehensive family stability program that addressed not just immediate crisis needs, but long-term economic mobility. Families in the program had an 87% success rate in achieving stable housing and employment within 6 months, and a 92% rate of remaining stable 2 years later. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had just walked to the car that night without stopping? Thomas asked, joining her on the back porch where she was enjoying the evening air. I try not to think about alternate realities, Rebecca said. But I know that Jake and I were running out of time. If you and Sophie hadn't found us. She shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. But we did find you, Thomas said, putting his arm around her. And you found us right back. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling in for the night. Somewhere in Denver, other families were facing their own crises, their own moments of desperation. But now there was a network of support waiting for them, a community ready to help, and a proven model for turning crisis into hope. Thomas, Rebecca said suddenly, I've been thinking about something. What's that? I want to start a scholarship program for kids who have been through family crises. Kids like Sophie, who showed incredible resilience and compassion during difficult times. And kids like Jake will be growing up knowing that his early story was one of rescue and redemption. Thomas smiled. I think that's a wonderful idea. What would you call it? Rebecca thought for a moment. The Kindness Circle Scholarship Program. For kids who want to dedicate their lives to helping others. I love it, Thomas said. When do we start? How about tomorrow? Rebecca suggested. I can talk to Pastor Miller about setting it up through New Beginnings. The next morning brought news that would add another dimension to their story. Rebecca received a call from Dr. Elizabeth Warner at the Department of Health and Human Services. Rebecca, I have an opportunity I want to discuss with you, Dr. Warner said. The President is creating a new position, National Director of Family Resilience Initiatives. It would involve coordinating family support programs across all federal agencies and working directly with the White House on poverty reduction strategies. Rebecca felt her heart start pounding. That sounds incredible, but what would it mean practically? It would mean moving to Washington, D.C. for at least 4 years. It would mean being at the center of national policymaking. And it would mean having the resources to implement programs like yours on a truly national scale. After hanging up, Rebecca sat staring at the phone for several minutes before calling Thomas at work. "It's an amazing opportunity," Thomas said after she had explained the offer. "What does your gut tell you?" "My gut says yes," Rebecca admitted. "But my heart is torn. Denver is home. Our community is here. Sophie's friends are here. Let's talk about it as a family tonight," Thomas suggested. "All four of us need to be part of this decision." At dinner that evening, they explained the opportunity to Sophie and Jake. Sophie, at 10, understood the significance better than Jake, who was mainly concerned about whether they would have to leave his toys behind. "Would we be helping more families if we moved to Washington?" Sophie asked. "Potentially thousands more families," Rebecca confirmed. "Then I think we should do it," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "We can make friends anywhere, but we can't help families everywhere unless someone gives us the chance." Thomas looked at his daughter with amazement. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best teachers," Sophie said, grinning at Rebecca. 3 months later, the Mitchell family was settling into a house in suburban Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. Rebecca's new office was in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, next to the White House. Her first major initiative was implementing peer support programs in federal housing, employment, and healthcare systems. Thomas had been able to transfer to his company's D.C. office, where he was now leading their corporate social responsibility initiatives. Sophie had quickly made new friends at her school, and had already started a kindness club to help new students feel welcome. Jake, now 4, had adapted to the move with the flexibility of early childhood, though he still asked regularly when they were going back to Denver to visit Pastor Johnny and all their friends. On a warm spring evening, 6 months after their move to D.C., Rebecca was giving Jake his bath when he looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mama, are we still helping families here?" "Yes, sweetheart. We're helping families here, and in Denver, and in lots of other places too." Jake nodded approvingly. "Good. Because families need help sometimes." "That's right," Rebecca said. "And when families help each other, everyone gets stronger." Later that evening, Thomas found Rebecca on their back porch, looking at photos from their time in Denver. She was holding a framed picture from their wedding day, with Sophie and Jake beaming beside them and the entire New Beginnings community gathered in the background. "Missing home?" he asked. "A little," Rebecca admitted. "But I'm also excited about what we're building here. Did I tell you that I got calls from 3 different countries today asking about adapting our model?" 3 countries. Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom. They've all read the research on our outcomes and want to pilot programs. Thomas shook his head in amazement. From a cardboard shelter behind an office building to international policy consultation in 5 years. If someone had told me this story, I never would have believed it. Rebecca leaned against him, comfortable and content despite being in a new place. "Do you know what I think the most amazing part is?" "What's that?" "Sophie. Look at the person she's becoming. She's learned that kindness is powerful, that communities can solve problems together, and that everyone deserves help when they need it. Whatever else we accomplish, raising a child who believes those things might be our greatest contribution." From inside the house, they could hear Sophie reading to Jake, her voice patient and loving as she helped him with words he didn't recognize yet. "I think you're right," Thomas said. "We're not just changing family services policy. We're raising the next generation of people who will change the world." As they sat together in the growing darkness, both Rebecca and Thomas understood that their story was still unfolding. The scared young woman and desperate baby, who had been rescued behind an office building, had become a family that was now helping to rescue others on a national scale. The kindness circle that had started with Sophie's simple observation, "Daddy, her baby is freezing," had grown beyond anything they could have imagined. And it was still growing, reaching new families, new communities, and new countries with each passing day. What started as one family helping another has become a movement that's changing lives around the world. This shows us that no act of kindness is too small, and no problem is too big when communities come together. Have you ever been part of something that started small and grew into something amazing? Share your kindness stories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more inspiring stories of hope and community.